Well, hi everyone. Welcome to Race Tech Info RTI Speed Tips with Bob and Chad. Uh, we've got a guest tonight that I'll have to say I think has probably done about everything in the racing industry, from being a racer and raced pavement, dirt, late models, modifieds, and I don't know what all else you raced, but I'm quite sure quite a bit. Drag racer, chassis builder, shock builder. This guy's done it all. So we're pretty fortunate to have now who is part of the AFCO Technologies group and is the AFCO shock representative that works with a lot of the shock tuners and a lot of you customers all over the country. So we welcome Rex Merritt. How's it going,
Thank you
Rex?
for great. Thank you for having me. This is a quite a privilege.
Well, my original introduction was 4 pages long, trying to get everything that you've done, but I thought I should probably condense it a little bit because then you might be offended or something if I had too much to say. So, what's going on with
We,
Rex?
just enjoying kind of racing, getting back going again here. Of course, I live in Missouri, and the track's all open around here about 3 weeks ago. Phenomenal car counts, good crowds. I mean, it's really picking up. It's really good right now.
And on that racing resume of yours, what type of racing did you decide to go do this weekend?
Went drag racing.
Went drag racing. I see pictures of that car on Facebook. It looks like a pretty nice ride.
I appreciate that. It's a street car. My wife despises drag racing, so it's not a drag car. It's a street car. So
Street car
uh,
that goes to drag races.
yeah,
Yeah. From point A to point B as fast as it can go.
we try to.
Try to. Awesome. Well, Chad, what's new and exciting with you today?
Oh, not too much. We're business as usual here. It's been a pretty busy week, and we're getting ready for a big factory support tour here. We got the Masters this weekend at Cedar Lake, and then the Clash at the Creek next week at 141. So we got 6 nights of factory support in 8 days. So it's a pretty good week-long event for us. We're excited to get out and see the customers and see what's going on around the country here.
Well, that sounds exciting. Last weekend I went to Marshalltown. I took Saturday night off. Last Wednesday we were at Stewart International Speedway, and I don't know if either one of you have been to Stewart, but it's got to be on your bucket list. Real short little racetrack that is manicured perfectly. Three wide racing. It was unbelievable racing. Jonathan Logue ended up passing for the win on right at the flag for the sport mod with his AFCO shocks, and then in the stock car race, young Dallin Murdy did the same thing, only he ended up coming up a foot short from winning that. So both of those two races were decided by about a foot at the flag stand. So it's pretty exciting racing, and those guys do a good job down there. Marshalltown was a good show. Toby always does a great job there, and I had a good time. Saturday night, I decided to hang out with the two dogs. Bobby was up to his in-laws, so I had both dogs, and that's about it. A few things that we've got new. Of course, we've got our two-link school is finally out live on the web, so that people can go to Racetech Info and purchase that, or it's available on DVD. Our stock car school is going to be available here probably within about a week, and just all kinds of little things on the RTI site that we've been working on, and that's pretty much about it. What are you going on Tuesday night, Chad? Are both of you going on Tuesday night next week up to 141?
Yeah, I'm going Tuesday through Friday.
Yeah. So where's Friday?
Or I'm coming home Friday. I'll be there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, come home Friday.
Yeah. My tentative plan at the last minute today was to plan on going there. Now, we do know I change my mind from time to time. There's a 7-hour ride, but I kind of think the dog and I might just make the trip and spend 3 days up there with all of our good buddies from Wisconsin and all over. Looking forward to it. I didn't go last year, so I missed that show, but looking forward to going up there this year. Well, if there's anybody out there that has any questions or anything, we've got all kinds of knowledge here from all kinds of race cars. Um, we're pretty lucky, like I said, to have Rex on here because I think if it's out there, Rex knows about it, and if it's to be done, I'm pretty sure he's done it. I know we've had a few leaf spring questions over the weeks, and I know the one guy said, I told the one guy, says, wait a couple weeks, we're going to try to get Rex Merritt on there because there isn't anybody that I know that knows more about leaf springs than Rex Merritt. So hopefully they'll come on. RJ Merchant, he's just saying a big thanks for the school and for the front end updates that we did on his car. He got his first win in 2 years on Sunday, so he was pretty excited. Cade Richards is on. Cade's a young man that a couple of years ago got to come to the school when we did that video deal. Send us a video on why you think you should get to come to the school. Cade's done a great job. All of our old buddies, Joey Walsh is on, and so once again, any of you in Caden Reynolds, our hobby stock guy that runs pretty good on our shock program. So but anyway, like I said, anybody needs any shock questions or anything, feel free. Any new things that you want to show us, Chad, you got on hand?
Well, we're always working on new stuff, and one of our product release for tomorrow is going to be, we've expanded our breathers a little bit, so we've been making the female -6 and -8 breathers. Now we made the male one, so you don't need to add an extra fitting to the equation there. You can put that in a line and breathe the rear end or the fuel cell. So we got 4, 6, and 8 in the male, and we got 6 and 8 in the female. So we switched to a new filter company. These are made in California, so we're pretty excited about that. We eliminated the Chinese filter we were using and brought this one home to America. So that's what the product release is going to be for tomorrow. So always working on new stuff.
And what about you talked about some shock guards. Tell us about what you're doing with the shock guard.
Yeah, so we took over the manufacturing and distribution for the ricochets, and we basically, his design was a complete plastic product. As you know, they kind of broke a little bit, so we redesigned it, made a metal base, and it bolts together. And I'll just go grab one real fast. I'll be
okay. Question for you, Rex. Gentleman wants to know if you're going to do any more driving schools.
Possibly. I've been doing some one-on-one driving schools. I don't have anything scheduled right now. Our driving school deal is it's been a 2-day event, and it's hard to get a racetrack, that they can give up 2 days right now. But I've been doing some one-on-one stuff.
Okay.
My driving
so
school
how
is
would they...
a little bit.
Okay. So you have been doing some one-on-one stuff with a few guys then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is AFCO planning on coming up with the metric frame like the AFCO Chevelle stub frame?
We've done the groundwork on that. Actually, quite a bit of the groundwork done on it. Had it. We made a model frame, taken a factory frame, and gotten the sanction body's approval on some of the design differences we can do, kind of like what we did with the Chevelle frame. But right now, with the steel prices and everything so volatile, I don't see it happening for probably the next 2 years. There's quite a bit of money in getting the tooling and stuff for the stamping. So it's in the works, but not soon.
Okay. All right. All right, Chad, show us your shock guard.
Yeah, so this is the new Ricochet with the metal base on the end of it. So the guard's still plastic and bolts to the metal base with the 2 bolts there. So that'll be interchangeable if you do break the middle of it. But so
that'll be possible to purchase that in the 2 pieces then?
yeah, you'll be able to buy the parts separately or bolted together as a complete unit.
Okay. What does it cost for a one-on-one driving school session?
A lot of that's dependent on where it's at and what all I need to bring. I've done some schools in the past where I take it's one-on-one with my car and the student's car. And basically, what we do is we go out and after we go through the car and talk about the different techniques and what we're going to do, I'll go out and well, first I'll have them go out and I'll follow them and run about 10 laps and kind of see, where their pluses and minuses are. And then we'll go out and run 10 laps side by side. I'll be on the lower side and they'll be on the high side of the track, and then we reverse it. I run the top, they run the bottom, and then they follow me. And what I do there is just basically building trust up with them on their cars and how fast they can go, pushing to the edge. And we run a lot of laps that way. So the cost is really dependent on how thorough they want to get and if I'm going to bring a car or not. But it's been from $700 to a lot more.
Got it. RJ has a question. On Sunday, the track was tacky in 1 and 2, but dry in 3 and 4. Felt like he had to wait for the car to hike up to get traction. Would putting a higher compression left rear shock help with this or hurt my phase 1? I'll let you answer that one, Rex. You're a resident shock guy tonight.
It helps you on one end of the track, and hurts you on the other. On that, I would, if the track's hooked up on one side and say the sun's shining on 3 and 4 and makes it really slick, I try to tune the car for the worst part of the track, because normally you can drive through the faster part, without technique. So on the shock, it depended on the car and what kind of rear suspension it is.
It's a 4-link car.
4-link car. So a standard deal for a track like that would be like an 8 or 9 compression, probably a 2 to 3 rebound.
Yeah, that's what we have found. And in this situation, RJ, it's definitely, if you put something with a lot of compression and a lot of gas pressure, the racetrack or the corner that's the tacky side, it's going to help you because it's going to free you up getting in, allow the car to steer a little bit more, roll through the middle better. On the other end, it might free you up too much. So kind of like what Rick said, kind of depending on which corner is the worst, I would probably tune for that and muscle it through the other. But trail braking is a big factor in keeping the car so that it's up on the bars is what they call it. That's something that if you can do a little better with that, sometimes you can trick the car with the brakes, getting it to do what it's supposed to do. So if you were last week's guest mentioned the fact that we had a customer, a person say, if you had one change, you could only make one change before going out for the feature. And last week's guest responded with, it would probably be adjust my left front shock. What was he meaning by that?
Normally, the way I tune a car, not saying it's right or wrong, the left front shock's about the only shock I normally tune with on a regular night of racing. And early in the night when the track's got quite a bit of bite in it and good corner speed, I'll have the left front tied down a bit. But when the track slicks off, if it seals up and the corner speed slows down, I'll go from a tie down left front to an easy up. Otherwise, go from, say, a 4 compression 6 rebound left front to like a 5 compression 4 or 5 compression 3 rebound left front. What that does is letting the car transfer weight over a little quicker, and plus it gets weight back on the right rear a little quicker.
Well, when the racetrack slows down, your corner speed's slowing down too. So it's gonna, you need a little bit more help getting the car over on the right rear. So by using that easy up, little stiffer compression, keeps it a little tighter on the right rear, getting in, gets the car back up. It's a little more responsive when you go to throttle it up. And like you said, it kind of keeps side biting that right rear tire a little bit more. So definitely a plus on that. What about now that we can run the chains as far as tightening and shortening the chain, lengthening the chain? What do you see people doing with that?
Uh, Getting in trouble usually. Um, Chad's got a really good chain adjuster where you can adjust the droop in it. Uh, the biggest thing on a chain is keeping the spring in the car. Otherwise, never letting the car come off the spring, because when it comes off the spring, it's coming off. You're losing bite, losing grip because you're not pushing the tire down. Uh, I I don't see a lot of people changing the right rear that much. They keep the car in the spring a little bit. The left rear, where they're letting the car get hike or get rolled. Say if you got 4 inches of droop in it, when track slicks off, you'll drop it down to 5 or so. It's just letting the car roll over a little bit more. You got to be careful with that chain, because if you got it too tight, it'll keep the car from wheeling, but you're also going to jerk the left rear tire off the ground.
What about the left front chain?
Uh, I don't do that with a chain. I got a different method. I don't do it with a shock either. But that you can keep a lot of drive in the car, because if you can't let that car come up, so to speak, is the inertia's got to go somewhere. So if it can't come up in the front, it's going to go down in the back, and it puts a lot of drive in the car. Just got to be careful not making the car too loose on entry.
We got a question. How much stagger on a 3-link dry slick car Mod 4? When they're talking about the Mod 4, they're talking about the 4 cylinders that run in with soda. Those particular cars, short wheelbase, short, kind of a shorter type car. Stagger, in my opinion, is kind of what people have different opinions whether to put stagger in the car and let the car roll freer. Sometimes I think it's a mistake when people sometimes take too much stagger out of the car when it gets dry, because you start scrubbing that right rear tire, and anytime you break traction back there, you're gonna lose forward grip. So it's as far as a number, it would be hard to say. I would think on that style of car, 1 inch of stagger in the rear would probably be fine on a real slick racetrack. I think stagger in the front is equally as important. What's your opinion?
I agree 100%. I'll do 1 inch of stagger in the front all the time. I mean, that's my standard, and that's where I stay. The thing about the stagger in the back, if you've got a lot of stagger in the back, you're going to heat the right rear tire up quite a bit. And sometimes when you do that, it makes the left rear dominant. So it'll help you for a little while until you build heat in the tire, and then it'll hurt you. I'd rather do it with wheel offset than I would stagger. A lot of stagger on a heavy track's good, but on dry slick, don't take it all out, because then the car tends to flat slide rather than go around the corner.
Right. So what would you do on the wheel, on a spacer or wheel offset? What would you do?
Usually when track slicks off and slows up, I'll bring my standard deal on my cars is I'll run 2 off wheels on the front, 2 off on the left rear, and I'll run a 3 off with a wheel spacer on the right rear. And when the track slicks off, or I need to get the car in the right rear harder, I'll pull the wheel spacer out and move it in. So I do most everything with the wheel spacer on the right rear.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. I like changing the wheel spacers. That's something that I used to use quite a bit too. Next question. Buzzing the tires when on the gas. Then when it sets down, it finally hooks up. Any idea what's happening? Let me read that one again. Buzzing the tires when on the gas. Then when it sets down straight, it finally hooks up. Any idea what's happening? Well, if it's sitting down, it's taking steer out of the car. So the car's probably squaring itself up. And instead of spinning the tire trying to get the tail out, it's actually, well, the right rear is probably coming up and the left rear is probably not gaining anything. So it's probably taking, I'd have to say it's more of a steer issue. What would you guys agree? Or what would you guys say? I mean,
That makes sense with the steer. Yeah.
um, Richard wants to get into a modified. Been looking at used ones online, of course, seeing all kinds of builders and the different years. How old of a chassis do you think is too old to be competitive? And are all builders about the same if you have a little knowledge on how to set the car up, or is different builders that much faster than the rest? Um, that well, in my opinion, age, of course, is a number, just like with all of us. Now, the number of nights on the car is more of an important factor to find out, because you could buy a 5-year-old car that has 40 nights on it, and that car's probably a pretty decent car. The big thing that you have to, and this is kind of what David Stremme answered a question similar to this, was the fact that the technology each year, these guys are working on the front ends, doing a few more things with technology. And so it isn't so much of the age of the car, it's wanting to keep up with the technology of what's going on that you need to kind of keep in mind. As far as the chassis builders, pretty much every one of those guys do a great job. I mean, I can't sit here and say anybody doesn't do a pretty decent job. It's anymore, it's all about the relationship, I believe, that you strike with that particular chassis builder. If you're on a good, you're communicating with them and they kind of know where you're at and things like that. I wouldn't be afraid of any of those cars. I mean, they're all good race cars. Um, your old buddy and my old buddy, Donnie Jumper, has a question for Rex. I have always wondered why they call it a bird cage. Just don't get it.
We don't call them bird cages.
Yeah, that weird machine, they call them suspension cages.
Yeah, we tried to rename them, but it ain't going very well. But it was an attempt. Ours are the birdless ones. But anyway, why is it called a bird cage, Rex?
Well, actually, there is an answer for that. The original bird cages were like on a Magnati or an Italian sports car, and at that time they were built with they looked like a bead lock. They were bolted together multiple times because they didn't have the equipment like what you have. So the original bird cages, so to speak, or a floating suspension element on an axle tube, resemble a bird cage. I mean, they had arms going off of it, bolted together, in several different places. Which I don't know, it wouldn't hurt Donnie to go to a library and look at pictures once in a while.
All right, there you have it, Donnie. You heard it from Rex. Rex, we got a question here. It says, do you offer any twin tube double adjustable shocks that fit a sport compact?
With the right fabrication, you can make anything fit a sport compact. For something to fit in a stock location, probably not. But if you take it to a race car shop like Bob's shop, you can make any shock fit that car.
Jerry's got a comment here. He said, Chad, thanks for reaching out after last week's speed tips. I'm still working on that. Wanted to know, have shock packages for heavy rough tracks and dry slick, but I don't hear much about a shock for a dry rough racetrack. Any advice in that situation? What would you recommend, Rex? Shock for a dry
On a dry
rough
rough
racetrack?
racetrack,
Yeah.
yeah, I would stay pretty standard. You don't need any real high compression, soft rebound, or real high rebound, soft compression. Um, on a track like that, you know, not counting the left rear, but a 3 or 4 compression and a 5 or 6 rebound, it's pretty good. You know, not brand related, but that's a pretty good setup you can go about anywhere with. Of course, the left rear shock's going to be dependent on your rear suspension and your driving style.
Okay. This is another one of your good friends, I think, Rex. He's replying to Donnie Jumper's question. In Rex's case, it should be a squirrel cage. Do you know somebody by the name of Robbie Ellis? Hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Sean wants to know, would running zero spring split in a sport mod be okay? Yeah. We've got guys out there in sport mods running straight up springs. He's asking, say, a 550, 550. The majority of the sport mods today, I think, would be, that's a reasonable rate. We've got some guys that are running a pair of 500s. I still believe that sometimes, especially with a sport mod, if you get too soft, you're gonna lose some traction with that 2-link rear suspension. So you got to be a little careful there. It might, softer springs are going to help you turn in better, but you might sacrifice off. So in my opinion, your 550 deal is actually a very good combination. It's something that we recommend quite a bit, one way or the other. Donnie Jumper wants to let you know that he appreciates that very much. We skipped one, Garrett. Joby Mueller wants to know, they rebuilt a 1996 house car, front and rear updates for a customer, and it still keeps up and competitive. Oh, I completely agree with you guys. You can take, some of those cars, with a few updates to them are just as good. We've got a car here in Iowa that it's a 2008 Skyrocket car. And the other night at Marshalltown, a 2008 Skyrocket car with 5/8 shaft, silver bulb shocks that we built 5 years ago. And I mean, he drove by those guys on the bottom like they were going backwards. And so, it just all depends on the setup and the driver. I don't think it's impossible. On a dry slick racetrack, I have a real bad skate on entry into the corner. Mid corner and out has plenty of side bite and drive. Curious if this can be helped with a bar change, a spacer, or stagger. I guess it would kind of depend on what the skate means. If the whole car's skating, then I think you probably need to look at a right front spring change or right front shock change to get the car down on the nose to help it rotate. If the back is skating, then of course, what would you recommend if it was in the back? I mean, you could take if you narrowed up the track on the rear, like Rex was talking about with his 3-inch wheel and then taking the spacer off of it, that would work. I don't know if Stagger is going to much help you there. What's your opinion on that question, Rex?
It really depends if it's skating while he's still on the gas or when he's off the gas and on the brakes. You could have too much rear brake in the car and shake the car before it ever tries to settle down. sometimes could be a J-bar issue if the J-bar is real flat, or quite a bit higher than the pinion. It could be that. But, if you get somebody to film that car and see if that car's rolled over and then starts to skate, or if the car is starting to settle back down and then skating, will kind of tell you a whole lot.
Yeah, and it's he just commented it's a 3-link B mod. Yeah, I would have to say it's those, yeah, what Rex just said is a good point. Mike wants to know how much pull bar movement should you have with an AFCO dual stage pull bar with a progressive spring on a 4-bar A mod, 600 to 1200 pound spring, and it has the yellow biscuits inside.
Well, a lot of that's dependent on how much pinion angle you got in the car. Really, no matter what spring or biscuit combination, usually 3/4 inch to 1.5 inches is about right. Bob, I mean, you probably work with that more
Yeah,
than I do.
we,
I know Chad was a really good.
of course, we've always used, I don't know, I always kind of stuck with that 1.25 inch movement. That way, then, then I've kind of got the inch covered. And if it's a little more, you got the 1.5 inch covered. Back in the day when we used to get 2.5 inches of movement was just too much, because in a pull bar, it's kind of like the gravity thing. Whatever goes up, in other words, whatever pulls, when you get off the throttle is going to release. So if you get a lot of movement in the pull bar, it's going to make the car pretty free getting in. We've got a customer right now that we built kind of a combination pull bar out of different pieces of things that we had here just for the heck of it to try it. And the thing's got unbelievable straight line traction, but boy, does it get her free getting in. So we might have to do a little refab on that project, but it all Weir's parts in that thing though, just different combinations. And I'm like, my first comment was, I bet that might be free getting in. And so far, ever since they put it in, he keeps complaining, it's still a little free getting in. And I wondered about that. Christopher wants to know, when going from a dry momentum type racetrack to a dry stop and go, what would you automatically go for adjustment wise? On a stop and go racetrack, I mean, I'm pretty much sure you're going to want to keep the tail underneath you. So, side bite's going to be a key. Doing like what Rex said, sucking that right rear tire in a little bit more. But you got to be kind of careful there, because the momentum deal, you stagger and you roll the corner and everything is good. Stop and go, you've got to really be good on the brakes. In fact, actually, probably a little more on the front brake side on a stop and go racetrack than you would. But as far as adjustments wise, I'm not a huge fan of making big Panhard bar adjustments, because I think that can kind of affect the car in too many other areas. So I like what you said about the wheel offset. That's a good choice. And dropping the Panhard bar a little bit, like on the pinion, might not be a bad idea to keep it tight getting in. But you're just gonna, and then drive it straight off. What's your opinion?
Probably the biggest single thing would be brake application. I mean, when you're on a slow dry slick flatter track or slow cornered track, I mean, you're going to have to get motion slowing down before you got the car and you're off. So less rear brake on a flatter track, where you're not so you're not pitching the car. Sometimes if it's something I'm going to be running and I'm real serious about it, sometimes I'll change my camber settings in the front a little bit on a flatter slow track.
And then we'll get the question, what would you change from to what? Would you add to or take out, or what would you do there?
Well, It's you got to let the car tell you. You want the face of the tire on the racetrack. So whatever it takes to get the full face of the tire on the racetrack.
Yeah, because on a flat rate, yeah, you're right. Um, Logan's got a question. Adding zero index to your left rear versus loading left rear spring more. Are they the same, or is the situation for both? That's a good question for Chad. What do you think?
I guess I'm not really sure what, that's kind of a loaded question. I mean, the zero index thing takes the bind out of the suspension. Load is load no matter what. So, I mean, if you're going to add more load, you're going to have more load, you're going to have more extended load. Adding the zero index, I mean, really all that does is take the bind out so the suspension can have more drive angle and have more load in it and not rely on the bar lock for traction. So I guess I'm not really sure there, but the zero index thing is kind of the trend. Obviously we talk about that I think the last 8 weeks in a row, but I just had a guy last week that really was struggling and went back standard and was really good. So it's not magic. It has a lot to do with how you drive the race car. And it's about the whole balance and the whole package. So, can you win races with just adding left rear load? Yes. Can you win races with zero index? Yes. Can you, it's about the whole package. So, zero index, there's a lot of guys winning with it. And if you know how to tune it and adjust it, it's pretty good.
Next question is, what's a good spec shock kit for a stock car? Non-adjustable, steel shock body only. So I'm assuming what they're meaning by spec shock is something that cannot be reworked.
We have a spec shock program at Batesville Speedway. It's a shock that's not supposed to be reworked, and that deal goes real well. That question's there's a lot of scenarios different. The cars that particular spec shock's on are stock cars on steroids. I mean, we're talking 700 horsepower on asphalt takeoffs and state of the art cars, basically. And it's really the valving wise, it's a pretty common valving. It's the same thing as what most of the shock tuners put in their cars. So that would, it really depends if it's a USRA car, if it's an IMCA car, if it's an AFCO car.
Yeah, that would be a little bit different depending on for sure what sanctioning body you actually run. Next question we've got on an '08 Pierce clamp car. Why would you run a pull bar, a 90-10, and a lift bar with bushings for braking? Seems redundant. Let me know your thoughts. Actually, that would probably be my favorite setup to run if the rules allowed it, from the fact that you've got your pull bar, so you've got all kinds of traction, quick traction. You've got your lift arm with the brake bushing on it, so when the car comes down, rather than hiking the back up and trying to unload the rear end, it just pulls the whole car down. And then the 90-10 just helps the fall of the torque link. It actually keeps the car so that the right rear is a little bit more loaded. The brake spring or the brake bushing is going to load the whole or unload the whole car or keep it loaded, but the 90-10 is going to help with a little bit more side bite on the right rear tire. What would your opinion be on that? I mean, it was so good when Shyrock had it that then the one sanctioning body outlawed the torque arms.
That was about the best car we ever had, I think, was the pull bar with the brake bar and the 90-10.
Oh, that thing was awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a better combination, really, but
I think the brake bars are illegal everywhere now, if I'm not mistaken, pretty
you
much.
don't see anybody running it, so I'm assuming that's the case.
I had a suspicion there that Logan was talking about 0 point in the shock and not zero index. You said zero index, but he's talking about
he said 0 point in the shock.
So big difference there.
All right. Let's go back and reread that question then. Adding 0 to your left rear versus loading the left rear spring. Gotcha.
Now you need to explain 0 point.
That's a whole different deal. Rex, you're the resident shock guy for tonight. You want to explain what 0 point is?
The 0 point in the shock?
Yep.
That basically, if a shock doesn't have any 0 point, it pushes in and out without a lot of initial movement. 0 point, like if you've got 60-pound 0 point, it basically means, in my opinion, it's going to take 60 pounds to initiate that shock movement.
Yep. 100%. See, and that's where the old hand dyno gets in trouble with today's technology, because you can have a shock that has 150 pounds of 0 point and it feels just stiffer than heck. But when you put it on the race car, if the rest of the shock never gets over 300 pounds per square inch at any travel, it's actually a relatively soft shock. So that can be confusing. But yeah, I apologize, Logan. I kind of misrepresented that one. I've been kind of used to reading the 8 weeks of 0 point in the cage, the 0 indexing in the cage, and I thought we should talk about that. On a B mod, advantage or disadvantage to have the right rear spring on top of the housing? Well, it depends. Of course, if you're running an IMCA car, you have to. If you're running a USRA car, you can put the spring pretty much wherever you want to. It goes back to, and Rex, when Rex was in a Dirtworks car, I'm quite sure you guys had the same type of similar setup. But back in the day, 1995, 96, 97, we had the right rear spring behind the housing and the left rear spring in front of the housing. The race car would get tight getting in, because as you go into the corner and the pinion drops, you would load the right rear tire. So in turn, it would get side bite. When you got back on the gas, though, it would transition to the left rear real good, real fast, and hook the car hard off the corner. Now, if you were on a momentum type place, sometimes that could be a little bit trickier, because that instant in the middle of the corner when you're transitioning from off the gas to on the gas, the car could be a little bit tricky. But our old cars won a lot of races with that setup. And I know there's some Wasota guys that are running that setup today. Mark, he said he raced Saturday sport mod. Car felt really good. Track slicked off. Right rear trailing arm was leveled out. Rear temperatures, the right rear was 137 degrees, left rear was 117 degrees. Is this common? Would you look at right front spring or right rear spring? I'm not super sure. I would almost be led to believe that maybe you wouldn't want to run that right rear trailing arm completely level, because if that right rear tire is hotter like that, more than likely that's the tire that's scrubbing. So it could be steering the car too tight, getting into the corner to the point where you're scrubbing that. If you had a little bit of angle, I don't think a spring's going to fix your problem in this situation. I think you'd be better off to either have a little bit more stagger, or you'd be better off to put just a little bit of angle. Even 3-4 degrees of angle in that right rear trailing arm could free that thing up. Tire temperature wise, you're 20 degrees off. I've always thought if my race car was 10 degrees difference between those two tires, I had a pretty darn good race car. I mean, the right rear is going to run warmer just because it's getting more side load and flexing the side of the tire, which is creating heat. And plus, you also have your brake heat that can kind of be another issue, but that would be equal on both tires. Please explain the term spring table. I'll let you do that one, Chad.
I made a drawing.
Wow.
Spring table.
Spring table. Awesome.
So You can kind of maybe explain it while I try and hold it in the visual there, but basically the spring table is the distance from the ground to both spring mounts on a coilover situation, just like drawing there. So if the right rear is higher than the left rear, the car is not going to want to roll over. If the right rear is lower than the left rear, the car is going to want to roll over and induce roll. So this, I drew a coilover situation because this was really easy to draw. On a spring separate, like a B mod situation, then it would be, you'd have more factors there. So the height of the spring and the depth in the spring cup. So on the front of the car, then the spring height and the depth of the bearing on the spring cup matter too. But in a coilover situation, it's where it mounts to the chassis. So it's going to be ground measurements on a coilover, and on everything else, it's spring heights and bearing locations and screw jack locations.
And when you're talking B-mod, you're talking a car that runs the springs on top of the housing. Because
Yep.
if you have a B-mod that uses sliders, it's the same exact thing as a coilover. And I just had this conversation with got a customer out west that I think he's won 7 out of 8 races or 6 out of 8 races and needed to improve his car. Well, when they purchased the car from us, we had the drop cup in the right front. And for some reason or another, I'm not really sure what happened, but they decided they didn't want to run that, so they changed that. Well, then he changed back to the drop cup and got it to the point where the car was much better rolling on the right front, because the right front spring table is below the left front spring table. Well, then on the rear, then this week he changed to the point where I think he put one of those blocks like what you have in your catalog for dropping the spring table down on the right rear, and going to try that, sticking it over. But it's just the old adage that when one is below the other, if the left rear is higher than the right rear, it's going to allow the roll to get to the right rear smoother and easier. Chris Bueller, Chad, we won last weekend at Baton Rouge. Thanks for all your help.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
With sort of Midwest modified, is it better to use a 16-inch left rear and then do a 2 or 3-inch spring table? What would you recommend? Well, once again, if you're running a Wasota car, it doesn't matter what the length of the spring is. It's all in where the spring is mounted. If you're mounted on a coilover, or if you're mounted on a slider, you could have a 16-inch and 11-inch spring, and the car's only going to know where it's mounted to the car and where it's mounted to the rear end. Is that correct? And so what the difference is, and rate-wise, the rate's going to be the same no matter, if you've got a pair of 200s that are shorter. I always liked, with the coilover setup or a slider setup, I always liked the 13-inch with the 16 on the left rear. The reason is because I felt we could run a little softer 16-inch spring, put a little bit more load in it, and in the right rear, when we would run two 16-inch rears, for some reason or another, I always felt like the car kind of felt like it was a little unstable down the straightaway at times. And it could have just been my imagination, but we always ran a 13 on the left and a 16 on the rear. But as far as your spring table goes, unless you physically change the location where it's located on the chassis, changing the spring is not going to affect it. Question from Colton. If the right front frame rail bottoms out on a USRA B-mod, what options are there to fix this issue? Raise the ride heights, lower the ride heights, stiffer the right front spring, more compression on the right front shock? Well, I personally don't. I've not found it stiffening. If the car's going to bottom out over there, I've not really found that stiffening the spring really has much of effect, other than it makes it bottom out worse. Raising the ride heights, you could do that. However, once again, you're changing the front end geometry a little bit. I actually tell guys either try a stiffer right front shock, one compression more than what you have, or change how you enter the corner. Back your corner up a little bit. Don't drive the car in so far and try to set it, back it up. Let the car turn a little earlier so that when you're to that point, you're already going forward. Because when you're back on the gas, it's not going to bottom the front end out. It's when you're off the gas is when it bottoms out. Would you guys agree?
For sure. Yeah, I had a customer today that we talked around and around about his car. He couldn't get it off the right front, and then we came to the conclusion that it was probably an anti-dive situation. So this might be a circumstance where it might be just a little bit of anti-dive to help that thing on braking into the corner too.
That's a good point. Explain that further, Chad.
So when the A-frame is higher in the front than the rear, that would be anti-dive. So that helps the car to not roll on the right front so hard. So it resists roll under braking. Correct, Rex?
Yep.
That's correct. The factories used to put anodive. All the factory frames had anodive in them because when you get a carload, your family in your car, and you cross the railroad tracks, you can't run a spring stuff enough in the passenger car to keep the oscillation. So they put anodive in it to slow the oscillation down, and that's kind of where it come from. But you're 100% correct on that. The anodive in today's, well, maybe not today, but a couple of years ago, everybody started doing pro dive in the right fronts because you can make the car cut a little bit better. But then they were just burying the frame in the dirt, So a little bit of anodive definitely helps a race car, in my opinion.
Yep, I would agree with that. Cole wants to know, talking wheel offsets and wheel track, good starting point on a modified. As a rule of thumb, I've always tried to put my left two tires in line and my right front tire outside of the right rear 1 to 1.5 inches was kind of always a general rule of thumb. B mods are pretty close to that. It just all depends on if you're talking a B mod that can run the offsets fine. If you're talking a sport mod, we still try to line the left sides up. I've just always on a dirt car, I've always tried to track the left side tires but I do that with spacers because if you want the car to turn or turn a little bit more on the gas, if you suck the left rear in, it's going to let the car try to drive and rotate a little bit better. If you suck the right rear in, it's going to make the car tighter. You're going to have more side bite. So it's just, that's kind of the rule of thumb that I've always done. What have you normally done, Rex?
I agree with you 100% on that. The only thing you got to watch is if the guy's got a metric car. If somebody buys a metric car and it's got a narrow front track and they got a 60 or 61 inch centered rear end, then you get into some wheel offset problems. But no, I agree. Line the left side up. Right front should be outside the right rear. If you can't do that, if you got to center it all up, have the front wider than the rear.
Right.
And that'll keep the car more stable.
It's going to make the car much more stable and more directive. Do you recommend inboard shock mounts on the rear end or outboard? What's your opinion on that, Rex?
I like the shocks and springs as close as you get them to the same plane and the distance as the front shocks and springs. If you run them inboard, then you got to run stiffer valving in the shock, stiffer springs just because of the motion ratio. If you got them outboard, make sure you got some angle in them because if you got them outboard and the car goes dynamic, sometimes your shock's actually going the wrong way. So I look at the shock and spring mounts more what the car is dynamic or otherwise what it is up on the bars than I do when it's sitting there static. But if kind of the rule of thumb, if I'm working on a car with 60-inch rear end, I usually try to mount the shock mount 8 inches off the backside of the rotor and then lay it in, whatever degree I need to be on top. And that kind of gives me the placement.
We always had a rule of thumb of 15 degrees on the two rear shocks and springs. Now, of course, if this is a sport mod, then your springs have to be straight up and down, but your shocks can be angled. Um, Sean also wanted to know if we've tried running a drop cup on the right front of a sport mod. Every sport mod we send out of here has a drop cup on the right front. I'm just a firm believer in that spring table, and I think it definitely works, because you'll find a car where the spring table is equal in the front, the car will still roll, but it hesitates for a split second. It's not a smooth transition. It goes in and then it kind of dumps over. It's kind of almost like the camshaft effect. It's up, 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 and then all of a sudden it falls over. It's not a smooth transition. What are the effects of moving the front roll center to the right with a taller upper ball joint on the right front? I'll let you answer that one, Rex.
That's my question.
Yep, I think it's a good Rex question. Or Chad, either one of you.
Yeah, the roll center to the right. I look at roll centers as I look at my spring rates. The more I can move the roll center to the left of center in the car, the more right front spring I can run in the car, which equates to traction sometimes. Because the more spring you got in it, the more it's going to try to transfer weight to the rear. If you move the roll center to the right of the car, to me the cars sometimes are a bit skatey, and you got to run a real soft right front spring in it. That's my opinion on that. The roll centers where I try to work with is usually 8 inches to the left of center line and about 4 inches off the ground. But I could be way off on that. Bob, where are you at on this?
The 4 inches is good. We're actually only about 2 inches to the left. And what I found with the front ends, and I don't do as much myself with the front end stuff. I do our own sport mods, but all of our A mod stuff comes from whatever the Skyrocket or the GRT has. But as a rule of thumb, we're not quite as far, but then we do run a little softer front spring. So the next question would be, if you have a left rear spring on a slider, can you still get a load number with a load stick bolted where the shock goes? Well, why wouldn't you be able to?
We haven't played with it much on the rear. I mean, you're going to get some sort of a number there, so it's going to depend on if you're hanging, if you're compressing that cage, or if you're, there's so many variables there that, it's not like just taking that slider off and going to the spring smasher and smashing a load. So you're hooked up on the front side of the cage. You're going to be using the cage indexing. I just don't know how accurate a numbers you're going to get there. I don't know. What's your thoughts, Rex? I mean, we haven't played with it much. There's guys that are doing some things. The load sticks are so new, we don't have any real number. The guy that has a spring smasher is going to do the coilovers in the spring smasher and the load stick on the front. Some of the stock cars are playing with the sticks on the back. When you got an axle involved and you're moving an axle, your numbers aren't going to tell you much there. So, and especially adding a suspension cage in there.
That would make sense. Yeah, never thought. I wasn't thinking about that solid axle, because that's going to change the whole picture. Because whatever happens on the left, there's going to be some response on the right.
I mean, you got to prop the rear end in a position then and say, okay, this is my position. And, you'd be way better off to get yourself a spring smasher, or just calculate the spring load off your slider by 100 pounds per inch if it's a 100-pound spring.
Okay. Well, any other points that you guys want to add? We are on our 8 o'clock number here. Once again, I just want to make sure everybody knows we have all our DVDs are available, and our schools are on the line now, so they're available. Thanks a lot, Rex, for coming on. The hour went fast, and I sure enjoy all of your input. And Make sure that those people that sign your check point out that Bob
That's the
Warren's
most beautiful.
yeah. And actually, Chad will vouch for me. The other hand, I wore that thing probably straight for 3 years. And it finally got to the point where Bobby says, I think there's enough dust and sweat on that thing. You might want to retire it. And I'm like, okay. Well, I like how it fits. All right. Well, we're going to call it a day, and I appreciate you guys, and thanks for being on here.
We'll see you Tuesday, Rex.
Thanks for everything.